If you're going into a new Dynasty League going into 2024, or maybe you already have a league where you constructed your team and you're looking to get some key foundational wide receivers that you can build around, I'm bringing you 5 wide receivers that you should be building your team around going into 2024, where you could be drafting them, maybe who you should be trading away to acquire them, and where their value could potentially be later on in the season. So let's get straight into the video. My first wide receiver on this list, and I think a lot of people have already, a lot of different content creators and myself have brought him in multiple takes already since the 2024 year has started, and that is Jayden Reed. He has been in a mustache and a buy low and now a foundational video on our channel, and I think that's going to continue to grow as the offseason gets progresses, because he has been one of the most exciting players so far this offseason. Players that you should, once again, you should be buying, stashing, and even investing in as a foundational wide receiver going into the 2024 season. Look, we have seen an ascension of someone like a Jordan Love at the quarterback position. The Green Bay Packers have been hitting on their quarterbacks clearly for years. Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, and it looks like at the moment Jordan Love is going to be going into that category of successful quarterbacks for the Green Bay Packers. But what is exciting is Jayden Reed, the draft capital and the second-round draft pick here coming out of Michigan State, excuse me. And look, 64 receptions, 94 targets, 793 yards, a total of 10 touchdowns, wide receiver 25 on the year. On a points per game basis, he was a wide receiver 26 with 13.6 fantasy points per game. But what's really interesting was the second half of the season and how he has ascended to get more and more production. He's been getting a lot more opportunity, especially with Jordan Love here. Weeks 10 to 18, he was the wide receiver 10 in fantasy, which is incredible, averaging 17.4 fantasy points per game, over 5 targets per game, 6 targets per game and 5 receptions per game. The opportunity is there for Jayden Reed, and I do not expect that to slow down, especially with him being tied with, I'm not going to put him in a top 10 category, but without a question right now, he's at least my top 15. I would even put him in my top 12 dynasty quarterbacks going into the 2024 season with Jordan Love. And look, at the moment, there are a lot of opportunities and different values that you can get for someone like a Jayden Reed. A lot of people have said, what can I get for picks? People are saying a late first, early second. Maybe even people are even offering higher, maybe older wide receivers. You think of the Cooper Kupps, you think of the Stephon Diggs, you think of those players. You're going to have to pivot to a young wide receiver that has a top quarterback that is going to be the future of this franchise. And Jayden Reed, in a foundational move, wide receiver, maybe you need a good wide receiver too. That's how high I believe Jayden Reed can be in the community right now. He is the wide receiver 25 in multiple, fantasy leagues, or not fantasy league, but fantasy community rankings. I think as the season gets closer and closer, right now we're still at the beginning, in reality, the beginning of the off season when it comes down to fantasy. When that season gets closer and closer, there is no doubt in my mind, in your dynasty startups, maybe in your redraft leagues, Jordan Love is going to be costing more than a top 6 to 7 pick. And then he's probably going to be going in the top 4 rounds of your dynasty startups, where that value is going to be way too much right now. So that's why I do agree. He is a buy low in some scenarios right now, no question about it. But he is somebody, if you are willing to have, maybe you have a dynasty startup in the next couple weeks. Maybe you have a dynasty startup right after, the NFL draft, or maybe right before, the week 1 of the fantasy season. Jayden Reed is somebody that I'm going to be wanting to be drafting as a foundational long-term piece that I can try and win my fantasy leagues with. So if you do need a foundational wide receiver, Jayden Reed is somebody that I'm going to be trying to acquiring however way I can. Okay, my second foundational wide receiver that you should be trying to build around going into the 2024 season is someone that I am extremely excited about. He's in my top 12 in my dynasty rankings right now, and that is not consensus with the fantasy community here, and that is Tank Dell. If you were watching the buy low video that we just released, please go watch that take, because I do bring a lot of opportunity of why you should be buying him low now before his value rises. And I'll give you a little sneak peek of why is because his wide receiver average, I looked through multiple fantasy communities. You can probably see this on your screen. Flock Fantasy, Fantasy Pros, Keep Trade Cut, DLF, ESPN. He averages as a wide receiver 22, and he's a top 12 dynasty wide receiver in my rankings. When you think about that, you have to understand that Tank Dell is somebody that is going to continue to rise as the season progresses or gets closer. This is a team, Tank Dell is with a team who has an elite quarterback right now in CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud, the owners called him and said, who should we take here at the wide receiver position? He said Tank Dell. That's how significant this is. This is why he's a foundational wide receiver that you should be going out and trying to acquire. His first year in the league, 47 receptions, 75 targets, just over 700 yards, 7 touchdowns. He finishes as the wide receiver 39. Remember, he did get injured and did miss a couple games. He played only 11 out of 17 games so far this year. He was struggling with a concussion. He had a couple strains in his calf, if I'm not mistaken. But in the points per game, he finishes as a wide receiver 18, averaging 15 points per game. I said this in that other video, like I said, the buy low video, the consistency that he could have had if he was 100%. We've seen that from weeks 8 to 12 in the second half of the season here. He was the fantasy finishes from weeks 8 to 12 was the wide receiver 3. You're telling me right now, if Tank Dell would have finished, he would have been on pace for the wide receiver 5 in the second half of that season. Now, obviously, that's not a perfect math without a doubt, but let's just say he finished in the top 10 wide receiver in his rookie year with CJ Stroud. The value of Tank Dell wouldn't be the same. So this is why, in my opinion, he is a foundational wide receiver that I personally believe that you can build around going into the 2024 season. And maybe you can try and trade away some of these key players that maybe you think are a little bit more value or have been really consistent or maybe inconsistent in the fantasy realm because maybe their age or maybe their quarterback is going to change. Every situation is different. Right now, Tank Dell, if you were to send out picks for Tank Dell, he is worth the 107 to the 110 according to the community based off of that average that I gave you as wide receiver 22. But if you're telling me as we get closer to the season, maybe we're in the end of July, early August, Tank Dell is not going to go anywhere near the 107 to the 110. I guarantee you he will be a top 5 pick in a rookie draft in the 2024 class. The type of value that you could potentially get for him right now is maybe sending someone like a DK Metcalf, who's a little bit questionable, right? He had an up and down season. You know, with Geno Smith, what is that going to look like? Pete Carroll looks like it's gone now, right? Deebo Samuel, what does that look like? There are some of these players that you can go out and try and trade away, maybe pivot to someone like a Tank Dell. I don't care if he's 24 years old and maybe the same age as, you know, DK Metcalf or a year or two younger than a Deebo Samuel. The fact that he is tied with an elite quarterback and the production that he has given in his year 1, and I am not concerned about this team drafting another wide receiver. And if they do, I do not believe they are going to be taking away opportunities from the likes of a Tank Dell unless it is a top 5 pick, like a top 5 wide receiver like a Malik Neighbors, a Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously Emeka Buka's going back to college, a Brian Thomas. Those are the type of players I'm a little bit concerned when it comes down to taking opportunity away from Tank Dell. Other than that, I feel pretty confident. So if you're trying to build around a wide receiver right now, I will be trying to acquire Tank Dell as soon as possible before his value is going to skyrocket closer to the season. My third foundational wide receiver that you should be trying to acquire and building your dynasty team around. I think a lot of people did build around this player already last year, but I think the community was a little bit underwhelmed on how he performed, and that is Jackson Smith-Njigba. 63 receptions out of 93 targets, just over 600 yards, 4 touchdowns. Wide receiver 48 he finished, but in points per game, wide receiver 56, but only averaging 8.8 fantasy points per game. Now, what's really interesting about this is that a lot of the things and conversations that we were having when Jackson Smith was coming into the 2023 season was that, hey, he's going to be taking over Tyler Lockett's opportunity. Maybe we said that in the second half of the season or whatever, but we really didn't see that this year. And he did struggle trying to take over that opportunity. Maybe it was because Geno Smith was injured. Maybe it was because Jackson Smith also had that hand injury early in the season when he did break his hand and he missed some time, maybe building some chemistry with Geno Smith, and he had to take another step back. But now going into the 2024 season, you think of Tyler Lockett no longer being with this team. Think of Pete Carroll and a new head coach coming in, really unlocking Jackson Smith and Jigba, potentially with a new offensive coordinator. Does this head coach come in and says, you know what? I don't know if I want to keep this whole regime, right? Maybe all these guys could be moving. A lot of people have been favoring Dan Quinn. Maybe he brings in his whole new crew and unleashes Jackson Smith and Jigba on a whole nother level. Does this team draft a quarterback? I don't know, but what we do know is that Jackson Smith and Jigba is a favorable wide receiver to build around based off youth, based on draft capital, and based on what he did at Ohio State the years before he came into the NFL. Jackson Smith and Jigba did have a couple of games where he did flourish. Don't get me wrong. There were a couple games where we saw that Dallas game, 7 out of 11 targets, over 13 fantasy points, right? That was essentially his last big game. He did score a couple touchdowns, but that was his highest targeted game, reception and targeted game in 2023. Once again, 7 out of 11 targets for 63 yards and 13 fantasy points. That was against one of the best defense and best secondaries in the NFL against the Dallas Cowboys. Now, you're thinking of the value that you can get for Jackson Smith and Jigba. I don't believe you can get Jackson Smith and Jigba for less than a late first. When I say late first, I think he's valuing around the 107 and later. And I think some people may say, hey, that's crazy right now. But the community does not value Jackson Smith and Jigba that way. According to the community right now, according to Keep Trade Cut, he is the wide receiver 20. That's remember, a wide receiver 20, that is a mid to late 2024 first. Once again, according to the community, maybe you can send the 107 to get Jackson Smith and Jigba, the 108 to get Jackson Smith and Jigba. You thinking of these wide receivers who I love. Maybe you think of the Troy Franklins or the Xavier Worthies or the Adonai Mitchells. You think of maybe where they could potentially going, or maybe you'd rather take the chance on Jackson Smith and Jigba, who has a decent quarterback, and Geno Smith has produced fantasy relevant wide receivers, or has been showing that he can be an elite wide receiver and clearly has incredible hands to take his talents to the next level in 2024. If you need a wide receiver and someone like a Jackson Smith and Jigba, I am willing to trade for him right now. Can you send someone maybe like a Jordan Addison who may have quarterback questions going into the 2024 season? What if somebody like a Nico Collins, right? I like Nico Collins as much as I love him with CJ Stroud. That feels a little bit better, right? What about a T. Higgins? I like T. Higgins. I almost brought him on this list. I think he will be an honorable mention. What about his teammate in DK Metcalf, a Rashee Rice, right? You think of those, a Deebo Samuel. Those are the type of names I'm thinking about. Stephon Diggs. You think about these elite, older, potentially wide receivers. Devontae Adams. Wide receivers that you can kind of bring in and trade those guys away to acquire a Jackson Smith and Jigba. So he is my next foundational wide receiver on this list. My fourth foundational wide receiver that you should be trying to acquire and or draft in your dynasty startups, I would say this is one of my favorite wide receivers going into the 2024 season that I'm going to be trying to acquire and draft a lot of. That is Drake London. My projections of him is going to be out of this roof, in my opinion, going into next year. And you think of this new team that's going to be coming in with a new quarterback. I hope Arthur Smith is gone. You hope and expect Desmond Ridder is no longer going to be the quarterback under center going into next year. Same thing with Taylor Heineke. I don't care who it is. Please not Desmond Ridder, Marcus Mariota, Taylor Heineke. I don't care who it is. Bring in Russell Wilson, Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields, I said Russell Wilson. Anyone else, please. I don't care who it is. We just need a more competent quarterback. We also need a competent head coach that's going to unleash his weapons that he's had. Drake London, Bijan Robinson, and obviously Kyle Pitts. But Drake London this year caught 69 out of 110 targets, just over 900 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was a wide receiver 37 on the year. and wide receiver 42 on a points per game basis, only getting 10.9 fantasy points. And essentially, the reason why you should be trying to acquire him right now or be getting ready to draft him in your dynasty startups is really because of the upside that I'm really projecting of him with this new regime. That really excites me, where he's finally going to be having someone as is going to have a competent head coach, I would say, in Arthur Smith. And I think he really disliked fantasy football. He hated to unleash it. He did everything opposite that the fantasy community was saying that he should do at the time. And he said, you know what? You want me to run the ball with Bijan? I'm not going to give the ball to Bijan. You want me to throw the ball to Drake London? I'm not going to throw the ball to Drake London. That's exactly what he did this past year, but he is no longer there. Drake London, currently the wide receiver 19. Very similar to my last take here with someone like a Jackson Smith-Njigba, who was the wide receiver 20, in the community. He is going to be a foundational wide receiver that you can build on going for the future in this Atlanta Falcons team. You think of someone like a Justin Fields, who everyone has loved and mocked and has done trades and has made up scenarios. If Justin Fields goes to the Atlanta Falcons, it's going to be amazing for Kyle Pitts. It's going to be amazing for Drake London, amazing for Bijan Robinson, because of the upside with a competent quarterback. That's what's exciting. He hasn't had a competent quarterback anywhere so far in his career. And in 2024 could be the season. He's only 22 years old. And when you think of foundational wide receiver that somebody is not going to want to get rid of, I think that might be Drake London. And I think you might have to be paying a higher price than someone like a Jackson Smith-Njigba because of how everyone has been projecting him. Once again, very similar to Jackson Smith-Njigba's value according to the community. But in my eyes, I think his value is a little bit more. I think if you're wanting to acquire someone like a Drake London, I think the 105, the 104, the 106 maybe is probably the best price you can pay. But when you think of elite wide receivers that you can, not elite wide receivers, but wide receivers that you could be trading away to acquire someone like a Drake London, I think you're going to have to pay the price like a Devonta Smith. You think of T. Higgins as well. You think of Zay Flowers. You think of a Brandon Ayuk. You think of the Jalen Waddles. That's where I think his value could potentially go personally. And I think that's exactly where a lot of people are going to pivot because of how excited they are about, Drake London potentially being with a competent quarterback going into 2024. So he'll be my next quarterback that I'll be building around this year. Before I get into my last player, guys, please go to flockfantasy.com/land, the best place to support what Zach and I are doing here at DynastyLand. We have spent countless hours scouting the 2024 draft class, and we have already released our version 1 of our rookie report. Here is an example of Marvin Harrison Jr. of all the traits, attributes, pro comparisons, where we have him ranked. We broke him down, spent time, a summary, his stats, the whole thing of Marvin Harrison Jr. And we've done that with literally every single player of the 2024 draft class. And it's only going to get better as we are going to be releasing our version 2 of our scouting report in the beginning of this month. The beginning of February, February 1st, we're going to be releasing version 2. Not only do you get that, but you get so much more. The fantasy hotline, the dynasty trade review, so much more when you sign up at flockfantasy.com/land. Once again, the best place to support what Zach and I are doing, and so much more. Okay, and my last wide receiver on this list, somebody that, I'll be honest with you, I was off on going into the 2023 season because of the quarterback play. And that is Michael Pittman Jr. Zach and myself were off on Michael Pittman just based on the struggles that we expected someone like an Anthony Richardson to have. Now, when he was on the field, he was phenomenal and did spread the ball around to Michael Pittman. But we didn't see a full season of that with Anthony Richardson, unfortunately. But we did see that with Gardner Minshew. And Michael Pittman did eventually become a great fantasy value going in the 2023 season. He might be quarterback proof. I think there is no doubt. I would say he is quarterback proof when you think about this whole breakdown that I'm about to give you here. But caught 109 targets, over 109 receptions out of 156 targets, just over 1,100 yards, 4 touchdowns, was a wide receiver 13 on the year on wide receiver 14 on a points per game basis with 15.6 fantasy points. Like I said earlier, I do believe he does fall into the category of being quarterback proof. You think of the history of quarterbacks and Matt Ryan, Phillip Rivers, you think of Sam Ellinger, you think of Gardner Minshew, you think of Anthony Richardson. He has been fantasy relevant with all 5 of those quarterbacks. I'm probably missing a quarterback within there as well. But Michael Pittman is the truth. And if he does not re-sign with the Indianapolis Colts, this is exactly why I believe he is favored to be someone incredible that you should be building around going into the 2024 season. I can name so many teams where he can go and excel, maybe with the better quarterback. What if he goes to his division rival to the Colts and takes over Nico Collins' opportunity and he gets the bag? What if he goes to the Giants and becomes the number 1 wide receiver? Well, probably not the best quarterback play, but who knows? What if he goes to the Chargers where Mike Williams, and or Keenan Allen could potentially be walking because they need a wide receiver with Justin Herbert? That's how significant this is. What if it was the Chiefs? Chiefs need a wide receiver. I know you got Rashee Rice there. He's excelling, but what if they give him a bag and he hits free agency? That's what's exciting about Michael Pittman. And once again, a quarterback-proof wide receiver who has finished in the top 15, top 16 for the past couple of years is pretty significant when you think of somebody that you can build around in your future here. According to the community right now, he's a wide receiver 15. So 26 years old, wide receiver 15. Once again, you're probably going to have to pay an even bigger price going into the 2024 season for someone like a Michael Pittman. A name that automatically comes to mind, as much as I love him, that I can trade away to acquire someone like a Michael Pittman, is DJ Moore. And let me tell you why. This is the only way I'm trading DJ Moore for Michael Pittman. If the Chicago Bears do not draft Caleb Williams and drafts the likes of a Malik Neighbors or a Marvin Harrison Jr., I do believe someone like a DJ Moore takes a back seat. What about a Jalen Waddle, who is a wide receiver 2 right now on his team? Does Michael Pittman, with the number 1 wide receiver tag, with a lot more opportunities with Jalen Waddle behind Tyreek Hill, how does that change for you? You think of Jordan Addison, who's also the wide receiver too. Maybe he's a younger wide receiver, but Michael Pittman feels a little bit more consistent, even though Jordan Addison did have a good year. This is the type of narratives and pathways that I'm trying to look for when I think of a wide receiver that can excel, get the same production that he has had so far in his career, or even increase his production coming into the years to come. So once again, Jaden Reed, Tank Dell, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Drake London, and Michael Pittman Jr. are 5 wide receivers I'm trying to either draft in my Dynasty startups or try to acquire and build around when I'm thinking about constructing my Dynasty team. Comment down below of any wide receivers I did miss. Let me know what you think of. If you like this version of this video, or maybe you say, hey, should I do another one, but the running back version? Once again, comment down below. As always, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. It's all love.
Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.